Hey everybody, welcome to the first ever international edition of the weekly recap on telecoms.com and Light Reading. I am in a live Skype chat now with Jamie Davies from telecoms.com in the UK. We're here in New York. How you guys doing over there?
Yeah, not too bad actually, not too bad. It's a bit miserable, but you know, it is London, so what do you expect?
Right, and thank you guys for coming in late on a Friday afternoon in almost August. I know it's getting into silly season as they call it in the UK. So anyway, we just wanted to go over some of the top stories related to tech news this week. Number one, I have it up on my screen here. Jeff Bezos from Amazon is now the richest man in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad title to have, really, is it?
I think he's been kind of scooting back and forth between him and Bill Gates, and finally there was like a 1% rise in the stock of Amazon that finally put him over the top.
Yeah, I mean, but he's been doing a couple of really good, useful things in the last couple of years, especially when you look at the Washington Post. You know, that's going to start paying dividends over the next sort of couple of years. So, you know, I quite like keeping an eye on him, especially from a journalistic perspective. It's quite nice to see someone who's actually, you know, pumping some cash into a newspaper and making a good job out of it.
In other news this week, Foxconn, which is one of the major electronics manufacturers in the world, it's a Taiwanese company. The CEO came to the U.S., Terry Guo, and he announced that he'll be opening a plant here in the U.S. in Wisconsin. And one of the things that I found interesting about this is that he said it's going to add 3,000 jobs and represent a $10 billion investment in the U.S. And in return, Trump said that Foxconn would get $3 billion in tax breaks and subsidies over the next 15 years.
I mean, I mean, that's just going back to his campaign promises, isn't it? He's trying to bring as many jobs back into the US, you know, stop this erosion of sort of all factory jobs and manufacturing jobs going out to the Far East. I mean, one other thing that might be quite interesting is, I think, is it just TV screens at the moment that they're manufacturing?
I think what the main point of the factory is, Jamie, is that it's going to manufacture something which actually makes sense to do here, which is flat screen TVs. Because even if you do that very cheaply in the Far East, it costs a lot of money to ship them. So I think that's what they're leading with. And just one thing from the Times article here I wanted to share. Even if this project produces 25,000 new jobs, that's a real small fraction of the jobs that were created in the first half of 2017, right? So we added about 180,000 jobs per month so far here. So it seems like small change. Maybe it's more of a PR stunt. Anyway, time will tell, right? I wanted to turn over to a couple of the quarterly reports that came in. You guys covered this on telecoms.com. Huawei, the telecom giant coming out of China, it looks like they're reporting the slowest growth for 4 years. So can you give us a little context around that?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think there's two sides to it. I mean, obviously, the telco space is still a little bit slow. You know, we have reached the peak of 4G. There is going to continue to be business over the next couple of years, but then the real surge in growth isn't going to come for another couple of years when 5G starts to take hold. So we're in that little bit of a lull in the middle. But at the same time, you actually look at the numbers that Huawei are posting sort of quarter on quarter, year on year. There's only so long that you can start doing sort of like 40% growth. You know, eventually they're going to start posting these massive financial gains, but it's going to minimize the percentage. It'll be interesting. I mean, one of the areas that we looked into for Huawei was more along the lines of how much of a success Huawei has been and whether that's going to kickstart recovery in places like Nokia or Ericsson, for instance. You know, you've got all these telcos, they're buying off Huawei all the time, but they're essentially creating a vendor lock-in situation. You know, the CTOs and the CIOs and the CEOs are eventually going to have to turn around and say, we're going to have to take lesser technology at some point, purely so we don't create this vendor lock-in situation ourselves. So it's an interesting conundrum, but you know, that's why they get paid the big bucks.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of vendor lock-in, we also got some news from Nokia and Ericsson, who, you know, everybody's kind of paling in comparison to the growth and success of Huawei, but these two incumbents are showing, it looks like Nokia is a little bit ahead of Ericsson. Can you give us a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, they were just a bit better in the way they restructured. You know, you look at what Ericsson did. They ploughed money into areas that really haven't paid off. And I mean, we've used this sort of term quite a few times, but you know, turning Ericsson around is like turning a supertanker. It's going to take a very long time. But Nokia, they, in all fairness to them, a couple of years ago, they went out and they spent big on Alcatel-Lucent. I think in today's term, it's close to 19 billion. You know, it removed their reliance on mobile and gave them a broader product portfolio and the fixed side of things. So although they're not making, you know, horrendous amounts of cash like Huawei is, they're broadening that portfolio, offsetting the risk in mobile, and you know, they're actually doing a lot better than Ericsson are. I mean, you know, it's a big battle in the Scandinavians, and you know, the Finns are winning.
Right, and just the last thing to kind of come around to, Jamie, the founder of Light Reading, Steve Saunders, he posted onto our site this week blog basically saying that automation is the next big thing for the communications industry. But it will have a human impact in terms of the people that work in this industry. So can you give us a little background on that and why it's so important?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think there's a few books that have been written about it, and it's sort of the next stage of revolution in business. You know, you go back to early days, and you started electricity took away the fact that we had to power machines. You know, this is another stage in evolution in the fact that you've got machines doing all the grafting work that, let's be quite frank, as first world countries, we don't want to do it. You know, they're sort of tedious, repetitive jobs which can be done, you know, without much thought. So that's the idea of automation, is taking away these roles from humans. And in theory, and I say massively in theory now, humans can focus on the more high value tasks. But you have to be qualified to do these high value tasks. And I think that where Steve is coming across is that there's going to be a massive generation of pain. So for instance, taxi drivers, when self-driving cars come along, they're going to have this huge number of taxi drivers who are probably going to be 60 years old. They don't get their state pension until they're 70. So that's 10 years you've got to figure out what to do with them and how they're going to fund themselves, because you've basically taken away their livelihood. You can't train them in the new jobs that automation has created. So there's this massive pain point, and unfortunately, we're not preparing ourselves for it at the moment.
I mean, you hear about this cutting across every industry, as you said, as the example that you gave. Anyway, Jamie, I want to thank you for your time. We will be in touch next week. We hope to keep this going. I love the UK-US connection. And have a great weekend, man. We'll be posting this up on Monday on the site, and follow up the week after that.
Sounds good then. Have a good weekend, mate.